Hi everyone. Today we're going to take a look at Acts 10, the story about Peter and Cornelius, and we are going to discover much, much more. Just as a little recap where we're at in our studies on Acts is that now we find ourselves in about year AD 39. Now, that may fluctuate a couple of years based on different points of view, but for our purposes, we're just going to go with 39 AD. And if you recall, we have already studied about Saul and also his trip to Damascus, his conversion, how he preached in Damascus, how his life was threatened, and so forth. And if you recall over here on the map, you see him leaving Jerusalem here, traveling to Damascus. Now, keep in mind, Damascus, that may not have been the location during his day and age, but for study purposes, just to show the route from Jerusalem, road to Damascus experience, and then he went to Arabia for approximately 2 or 3 years. And just know that he had a brand new set of eyes, spiritual eyes, really, to look at Scripture in a whole different way, like many of us have as we've delved into it ourselves and discovered things that we thought were so, but were not. And then after he studied and stayed in Arabia, he traveled back to Damascus to share the gospel message and back to Jerusalem, and he is introduced to the rest of the apostles, and Barnabas is with him, and by his fruit the other apostles see that he is genuine, and also by Barnabas's testimony to the fact as a second witness, if you will. And knowing that his life was threatened, they sent him through Caesarea on up to Tarsus in Cilicia, and then over to Antioch. And then he continued ministering through Syria back to the route to Jerusalem and back up to Antioch, where eventually he's going to meet up with Barnabas as they start the first missionary journey. So what we're seeing here of the travels of Paul are, as stated up here in the left-hand corner, these are before the first missionary journey. Now, last week also we studied about Peter traveling to the Judean countryside. He healed Aeneas, and also he raised Tabitha in Joppa. So he is presently in Joppa, which is about right in here where that number 5 is on this map. It's not too good for that, but and Cornelius is living in Caesarea. So now we're going to get started on that story about Peter and Cornelius. And just when you think you've heard that story over and over again and there's really nothing new to find out, that's when you're surprised. That's when Yahweh gives you new revelation. So we read in Acts 10, "Now there was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a captain of what was called the Italian regiment." Now a captain is also referred to as a centurion. "Dedicated and fearing Elohim with all his household, doing many kind deeds to the people and praying to Elohim always." So it's obvious he was very devout, as well as teaching his household to do the same, as well as doing many kind deeds. We also know he's from the Italian regiment because the Roman army was made up of several nationalities, and it was actually an honor to serve in the Roman army, and they would try out and hope to be selected to serve, kind of like an NFL tryout, if you will. He clearly saw in a vision about the 9th hour of the day, so that would be about 3 p.m., and that time period is significant. It states that a messenger of Elohim coming to him and saying to him, Cornelius, and looking intently at him and becoming afraid, he said, "What is it, master?" And he said to him, "Your prayers and your kind deeds have come up for a remembrance before Elohim. And now send men to Joppa and send for Simon, who is also called Peter or Kepha. He is staying with Simon, a leather tanner, whose house is by the sea." And when the messenger who spoke to him went away, Cornelius called 2 of his household servants and a dedicated soldier. Sometimes in other scripture references that soldier as a devout soldier, from among those who waited on him continually. So these are very close to him on a daily basis. And having explained to them all, he sent them to Joppa. So he went into great detail about what he had experienced. Now, Cornelius was a good choice through whom the door of faith was opened to the heathen world or the Gentile world. He was proof of the wisdom and goodness of Yahweh. The man who was chosen to this honor was not a reprobate, idolater, heathen, nor yet a circumcised proselyte. He was amiable and pure in his manners, and for his piety and charitableness was held in high estimation among all the nation of the Jews. Against such a person they could not, with any grace, be envious, though Yahweh should pour out upon him the gift of the Ruach HaKodesh. So he was a captain or a centurion, serving in what was called the Italian regiment of the Roman army. And most documentation on that role is that it's really even at times more than just 100. So he was a very capable soldier, having even reached the point of being a centurion. He apparently grew to love the Elohim of the Hebrew people and was devoted to him and to good deeds. And we already read that, how he was devoted. At the 9th hour, again, we read, which was 3 p.m., the same hour, keep in mind, that Yahusha had died, shows us a pattern once again to another pivotal event. So when we run across these numbers, these like numbers, like the 9th hour, and you go back through the Bible and you match them to another event referencing the same term, it's like a biblical marker, and it's important to go back and see common threads. So this is a common thread I wanted to point out, and we're going to see how it connects even further. So at the 9th hour, 3 p.m., the same hour that Yahusha had died, shows us a pattern, once again, a pivotal event. At 3 p.m., a messenger angel appears to Cornelius in a vision, which was all possible because of the finished work of Yahusha on the tree. So that in itself is significant, because Yahusha died for the Jews, but also died for the world. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever shall believeth in him shall not perish. So that's in John 3:16. And we read also in Galatians 3:28, there is not Jew nor Greek, there is not slave nor free, there is not male and female, for you are all one in Messiah, Yahusha, which is going to be a major theme throughout this particular chapter. So what made the difference? What got Elohim's attention? In Acts 10:4, the second half of it, part B, if you will, And he said to him, this is the messenger talking to Cornelius, your prayers and your kind deeds have come up for remembrance before Elohim. So those were very sincere prayers. And we also know that he was fasting. He was very serious. He was very devout to Elohim. And his request came right up to the throne of Yahweh, just like ours do. So we know that he received instructions and directions from the messenger, the divine counsel messenger, if you will, because Yahweh has several angelic beings and spiritual beings at his beck and call to carry out his desires and directions. So this messenger came and told Cornelius, and it's very clear. So that should be comforting to us all, because when we feel like we need that urgent, direct message during pivotal times in our lives, we can rest assured that he will give us the answer. And sometimes it may be even as clear as this. The messenger said, and now send men to Joppa, okay? And send for Simon, who is also called Peter. And he is staying with Simon, a leather tanner, whose house is by the sea. So there was no doubt in Cornelius's mind what to do. And that's when he summoned his servant and the devout soldier of his to send them on their way according to the messenger's direction. And while they're gone, he's also preparing family and friends, looking for, hopefully, Peter to actually respond and come to him. So in this study, we're going to look at Cornelius, who is living in Caesarea. He's seen the vision of the angel, and he's sending men to Joppa, which Cornelius actually did. He sent the soldier and the two servants. So he sent 3 people. And then we're going to read about Peter's vision of the unclean animals when he was at Simon the leather tanner's house on top of the roof. And we're going to read about how Peter receives the men from Cornelius, and he does go with them. Now, Cornelius was a leader. He not only ruled his cohort regimen well, which means he had several troops within the Roman army, he ruled his household servants and family well, which is very significant, because all of our ministries start in our homes first. That's where we learn most of our lessons. And he called a devout soldier, like I mentioned earlier. So the word implies that the man was like his superior officer, a convert to the faith of Israel. So he was much like Cornelius, though not in the full sense of the word a proselyte. It is natural to infer the same of the 2 slaves to whom their master imparted the vision, which to those who were living as heathens would have seemed strange and unintelligible. It is obvious that all such facts are interesting as throwing light on the character of Cornelius, and showing that, to the extent of his power, he sought to lead those over whom he had any influence to the truth, which he had found precious, as leading him to a higher life. And that is from Ellicott's commentary. So Cornelius was all about living each and every day according to Yahweh's truth, and also sharing that influence over his soldiers and his household. So we go on to read, and on the next day, as they were on their way and approaching the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. and he became hungry and wished to eat. So usually around the 6th hour, we're going to see also connects to a usual time of prayer. And of course, being at noon, which the 6th hour is, we all get a little hungry at that time. But while they were preparing, he fell into a trance. Now, this trance isn't that he's totally asleep. He's in a state that he's aware, but it's supernatural. And he saw the heaven opened, and a certain vessel like a great sheet bound at the four corners descending to him and let down to the earth, just like pictured over here, in which were all kinds of four-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts, and creeping creatures, and the birds of the heaven. And a voice came to him, "Rise up, Peter, slay and eat." But Peter said, "Not at all, Master, because I have never eaten whatever is common or unclean." And a voice came to him again the second time, "What Elohim has cleansed, you do not consider common." And this took place 3 times. Again, that's significant. And the vessel was taken back to the heaven. And while Peter was doubting within himself about what the vision might mean, look, the men who had been sent from Cornelius, having asked for the house of Simon, stood at the gate. So I think we've all experienced a word from Yahweh, and we're not totally sure about what it meant. And in essence, for a short period of time, Peter was kind of doubting within himself what that meant, because he was honest with Yahweh that he had not eaten anything common or unclean. So he was trying to connect the dots here. And of course, the men arrive at the gate of the city. Again, we studied about the gates last week, and the gates were where most of the business was conducted in most of the cities. And if anyone would know where Simon the leather tanner was, it would be at the gate. And they would probably also know of Peter. And calling out, they inquired whether Simon, also known as Peter, was staying there. So in the 6th hour, now just remember to view like numbers as markers connecting specific events with a common theme throughout his word. For instance, quantities, like we came across a quantity of the sheet coming down 3 times. We came across a quantity of 3 men being sent by Cornelius. We came across the time period that Cornelius was praying was at the 9th hour. We came across the time period that Peter was praying was the 6th hour. So we're going to connect some of these dots. Now the 6th hour also refers to a time period for prayer that's connected to Psalms 55:17. Evening and morning and at noon will I pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. So that's connected. Noon is connected to the 6th hour. And then also in Daniel, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, went into his house, and his windows being open, his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day, and prayed and gave thanks before his God Elohim, as he did aforetime. So that prayer time at noon is also designated there for Daniel. But the most significant thing I gleaned from this that Yahweh showed me was the connection of the 6th hour and the 9th hour, because that connects to one of the most, no, that connects to the most important event in history. And it's in Matthew 27:45 and forward. And let's read. And from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. Okay, so from noon to 3 p.m. And about the 9th hour, Yahusha cried out with a loud voice, that is, my El, why have you forsaken me? And if we skip to verse 51, and see, the veil of the dwelling place was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth was shaken, and the rocks were split, and the tombs were opened, and many bodies of the set apart ones who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the set apart city and appeared to many. And when the captain and those with him who were guarding Yahusha saw the earthquake and all that took place, they feared exceedingly, saying, truly, this was the Son of Elohim. And we see that account repeated as well in Luke 23 about the 6th hour, and darkness came over all the land, not some of the land, all the land, until the 9th hour. So we had 3 hours of darkness. And also these clues let us in on what is known as biblical astronomy language that is throughout the Bible. And so we have the 3 hours of darkness, that's astronomy language. We have the sun darkened, again, astronomy language. And the land was dark, the earth was dark. And also in the King James Version, we show that where captain is used in the Institute for Scripture Research marker in verse 54, it's synonymous with centurion. So now we have the hours connecting the dots, and now we have the soldiers and the centurions at the foot of the crucifixion tree. And we also have biblical astronomy, the earthquake, and those things that were done, they feared greatly, saying again, truly, this was the Son of Elohim. So the soldiers are saying this, the centurion, they had been given the gruesome task of doing the punishment to Yahusha and driving the nails into his hands and feet on the crucifixion timber. So let's look a little bit more deeply at this crucifixion time period, because we know that the sun and the moon are eclipsed for 3 hours at his sacrifice. Now, there's only one way that you can have a solar and a lunar eclipse at the same time, and that is to have a third object causing the double eclipse. Now, of course, we know Yahweh can do anything he wants to do. So other than that, I'm going to explain what also could have happened. And I'm not trying to convince you one way or the other. I'm just showing you from what others have studied and proven out. And this is a diagram from Gil Broussard's work, Planet 7X, which I highly recommend you go into his YouTube channel and website, because he's the scholar behind these studies. So here we have the sun here, and if we had the third object, planet 7x, that would be an object that could cause a double eclipse, okay? Because you have the Earth here, and the Earth right here is on its rotating track, if you will, or rotating orbit, if you will, that it normally travels in. And planet 7x comes across this way. So if you take the outer diameter of the sun and bring it down here, and you take this outer diameter line and bring it down over here, you see that this planet would block out the light from the Earth for 1, 2, 3 hours. And that was all done by trigonometry and calculations being beyond my expertise. And here you see the full moon. And how do we know it was a full moon? Because we know it was the time of Passover. And we know that the time period for a year had been altered by that time, requiring that they utilize the moon to establish the agricultural seasons. So that change in how long a year was took place back in Hezekiah's time, when the sun moved back 15 steps. That's actually stair steps. And if you look into Gil Broussard's work on Planet 7X, he has a video specifically about that. But the main thing is that in Scripture, we know it describes a double eclipse, no doubt. We also know that the Earth was dark for 3 hours, and that is no way you can get 3 hours of darkness with any eclipse of any sort except something to this magnitude. Now, we've already read the scriptures in Luke, and we already read the scripture in Matthew. So let's move on. So again, double eclipse for 3 hours. The full moon was, like I said, on the far side here. So we know the moon couldn't be causing any kind of eclipse. It was over here, okay? And because that's the position to be in to be a full moon. So it was on the far side of Earth, away from the sun. And there's, again, the full moon on that side. And we're going to look at that in more detail. So I found this little diagram that I thought would help us evaluate this and study it together, and be good Bereans and see if these things are so. That's all I'm trying to do, is present you with what very well possibly happened, and in my mind probably happened. So we have the sun over here. Now the moon goes around the Earth, but the moon doesn't rotate. So every time we look up to see the moon, we only see the same half of the moon always. And with a new moon, the sun is behind the moon, so from Earth we look up and we don't even see it. That is called the new moon. And as the moon rotates around, you'll finally see like a little sliver, and then it goes further. This is called the waxing phase, and this is the view of the moon as seen from the Earth looking up, okay? And so you see the first quarter, and that's why you get this straight line. Sometimes with people looking at flat Earth theories, they go, well, how can you get a straight line like that? Well, it's very simple. The moon is not rotating, and the sun is over here, and it's showing half of it right there. And then it goes on, and each phase is given a name. And when it's over here, it has full view of the sun, and that's how we get a full moon. Now, you might be saying, well, why doesn't Earth block it? Well, there's, I believe, like a 5% tilt, so the sun can fully shine on the moon without any issue. And that was the position of the moon during Yahushua's crucifixion. And then, of course, it goes on through the waning phases and so forth and so on. So, excuse me, in order to have a double eclipse, you'd have to have a third object. So, if this was a time period when this planet, which Gill refers to as planet 7X, to distinguish his work from a lot of the from the work that is just hasn't been researched thoroughly, but is put out there on YouTube, or possible sightings, and it's not a hyperinflated view. This is something that Gill, as an amateur astronomer and with his background, actually looked into as a skeptic, and he's worked out and proven all of these calculations. So he distinguishes his work as planet 7X to distinguish it from all the hype out there about Nibiru or just planet X. So when you see planet 7X, you know it's the work that Gil Broussard has done. And so we know it was more than likely a third object, and in this scenario we're calling it planet 7X. And with that object we would get a double eclipse, because this planet would block the sun from the earth, and also this planet would block the sun from the full moon, and cause a double eclipse from the earth. The sun would be darkened as well as the moon. So I took that diagram we were just looking at and brought it on this screen so you could see again the same scenario that they were probably experiencing. The sun, and then again planet 7X. Again, we see the lines showing the width around planet 7X and how it would shade the earth for 3 hours of darkness, and we see the full moon that was back here in the background. Now, of course, my diagram here is not of scale, because he named it planet 7X because this planet is approximately 5 to 7 times the size of Earth. So actually this planet is much bigger, and of course we know the sun is as well. So it would cause the looking at from Earth to the sun with that planet there, it would cause that solar eclipse. And looking at the moon as well, the moon would be eclipsed, and also the earth would be in darkness. So in order to have a double eclipse, you must have a third object, since the moon was in its full phase on the opposite side of earth during Yahushua's crucifixion. That's a powerful statement right there to discuss with anyone that would like to try to share their view on what could cause the 3 hours of darkness. Now, like I stated before, we all know Yahweh can do anything he wants to, but most of the time he lets his creation that we live in have these things come about according to his timing and his plan. So I ran across, by no coincidence, I believe, I think it's something Yahweh wanted us really to take a look at. So this is all coming from, don't lose sight of this, this is all coming from the fact of us connecting the numbers that were similar. Well, they were exact, actually. The 6th hour and the 9th hour, the noon to the 3 p.m. hour. So at this website, and I'll leave the description down here beneath our video in the description section for you if you want to look at the whole article. There may be some discrepancies with dates and stuff. There's different viewpoints on that, but understanding what this article was sharing with us is very powerful. So let's look at it. The crucifixion in Jerusalem. After 3 hours of darkness at midday on April 3rd, 33 AD, again, the dates may vary, Yahushua HaMashiach exclaimed the words, "It is finished," as he died on the cross. Immediately, the curtain of the sanctuary of the temple was torn. A great earthquake occurred, rocks were broken, and many dead saints were resurrected from their tombs, recorded in Matthew 27:51 through 54. The earthquake upon the death of Yahushua called attention to the great salvation that had been accomplished that day on the cross. The barrier between Elohim and man was not removed by the earthquake tearing the temple's veil, but by his Son being offered as the Lamb of Elohim for the sin of the world. The Centurion and his soldiers, who were given the task of crucifying Yahushua HaMashiach, saw the sky grow dark at noon. I mean, that's powerful. The sky grow dark at noon. I mean, we're talking dark. We're not talking for a few minutes of darkness. We're talking the sky grew dark. The sun wasn't shining, and the moon was not reflecting the sun in a full moon state. Followed by the earthquake as Yahushua died at 3 p.m. So knowing that here we have centurions and soldiers, and what was Cornelius? He was a centurion. He was a soldier. Do you think he might have once heard about this? Or maybe, was he even there? Who knows? Maybe he was in training? Who knows? I don't know. But we do know that there's definitely a huge connection of the most important event in the world with the centurions and the soldiers being highly involved in that event, and that would be something that would be well known probably by every soldier around, and those not around. Everyone knew about it. So here, followed by the earthquake as Yahushua died at 3 p.m. They recognized that Jesus was indeed the Son of Elohim. So here we have the very soldiers that were given the gruesome task of crucifying Yahushua HaMashiach and nailing his hands to the crucifixion tree. They are the ones that stood there to the point of his death, and they state, as recorded in Scripture, that Yahushua was indeed the Son of Elohim. So we definitely know that this group, the centurion and the soldiers, had no doubt. They had no doubt. This was a powerful moment that changed their life forever. And we need to recognize this because this gives us insight to why Cornelius may have been so devout, so disciplined in sharing about Yahweh and sharing about to his family and to his um, soldiers and to his servants that Yahweh was the true Elohim. So it goes on to say, an outcrop of laminated Dead Sea sediment can be seen at Wadi Zalim, above the southwestern shore of the modern Dead Sea, near the fortress of Masada. In this sediment outcrop is a distinctive 1-foot thick mixed layer of sediment that is tied strongly to the Qumran earthquakes onshore ground ruptures of 31 BC approximately. 13 inches above the 31 BC event bed is another distinctive mixed layer, less than 1 inch thick. The sedimentation rate puts this second earthquake about 65 years after the 31 BC. So that brings us to the time of the crucifixion. It seems that the crucifixion earthquake of 33 AD was magnitude 5.5, leaving direct physical evidence in a thin layer of disturbed sediment from the Dead Sea. So there's evidence of these earthquakes. An earthquake happening at Qumran, and then approximately 65 years later, this earthquake happening at the time of Yahushua's crucifixion. So that's another indicator, if you will, that anytime that this planet 7X, comes through on its irregular cycle into our solar system, it's going to cause earthquakes. It's going to cause extreme weather differences, whether extreme heat or extreme cold, loss of crops, as in the time of when Joseph was in Egypt and his father and his brothers had to leave Canaan and go over to Egypt for food because they were experiencing drought. So anytime planet 7X comes through our solar system, sometimes it has more impact than others. It just depends on how close it comes to the orbit path of the Earth. And the closer, of course, it comes, the more intense the seismographic impact on Earth. Now, as far as the Qumran earthquake of 31 BC, it said about 60 years before the ministry of Yahushua, a small group of Levites copied scripture onto scrolls at the small village of Qumran in the desert northwest of the Dead Sea. In 31 BC, a large earthquake occurred along the Jericho Fault on the western side of the Dead Sea. The earthquake dried up Qumran's main spring and severely cracked the architect. So if we jump down here, it goes, Josephus wrote of the regional devastation from the earthquake, and he said 30,000 men perished. The survivors buried the Dead Sea Scrolls, and Qumran lay abandoned after the earthquake. The Bible, of course, is completely silent concerning this earthquake and other events during the intertestamental period. No doubt everyone in New Testament times knew of ancestors killed in that event. So when that ground was shaking at the time of Yahushua's crucifixion, they probably had flashbacks to the time of the Qumran earthquake, wondering if it was going to be as severe as that one in which 30,000 men perished. So let's go on. The resurrection in Jerusalem, April 5th, 33 AD. It's in the opinion of the person writing this article, no human agency rolled away the stone blocking the opening of Yahusha's tomb in Matthew 28:2. It was the earthquake in the presence of the angel. God's sovereign action was obvious in both the earthquake and in Yahusha's resurrection. Of course, we know the purpose of the stone being rolled away was not to permit the resurrected body of Yahusha to exit. The purpose was to allow people to see that the tomb was empty. Okay, now 13, Jerusalem prayer meeting, summer 33 AD. Following the day of Pentecost, the assembled church in Jerusalem received the report of threats and persecution from the Jewish leaders. That compelled them to pray that the outreach of his servants and the spread of the gospel would continue. After the prayer, the place where they were gathered was shaken by an earthquake as believers spoke boldly. So again, with the possibility of Planet 7X causing these disturbances, it's still close enough to cause the disturbance or the perturbation of the earth. And again, 14, the prison at Philippi. An earthquake not only released Paul and Silas from the Philippi prison, but it authenticated their testimony. The jailer who witnessed the event recognized Yahweh's hand and believed in Yahushua HaMashiach, Jesus the Christ. That earthquake draws our attention to how Elohim was using his apostles to minister in the early days of the church. And he was using creation all around them. Today's earthquakes. When Yahusha, Jesus, was asked by his disciples what the sign of his coming would be, he talked. Now this is today's earthquakes, okay? We need to get in our mind that this applies to our time period. He talked of wars, famine, epidemic disease, and earthquakes. Jesus said, "These are the beginning of sorrows." And that's recorded in Matthew and Mark and Luke. The word sorrows is the Greek word meaning birth pangs. Seismograph analysis reveals that the frequency and energy of large earthquakes was not constant throughout the 20th century. And also, if we just drop down, it says there appears to be about a 30-year cycle of increasing and decreasing earthquake frequency, suggesting the beginning of birth pangs theme. Furthermore, seismographs demonstrate that earthquakes are indeed distributed throughout the globe, the diverse places as described by Yahusha in Matthew and Mark. So we today have all the instrumentation to measure this seismographic activity. And Dutch Sense does a fabulous job on that, keeping us informed. And it is truly amazing the amount of earthquakes we have and are experiencing, as well as the severe weather changes we see, as well as the effect on wildlife and the increase in wildlife death. Going on to 16 talks about Gog's future earthquake in Israel. Now, I thought all of this was very interesting because this is from a totally different perspective from Gil Broussard's work. I have to say that for the accuracy with time frames and eschatological events in Revelation and when and what will be happening at certain times, I'd have to lean toward or recommend you look more at Gil's work because not all of this article has been vetted. But this gives a very similar conclusion, which I highly value, as to the fact that this seismograph data was very evident in the Bible, and biblical astronomy is a huge part of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, but it's not something that we often key in on, and this is something, especially in our day and age, that we should key in on. And we need to seek the truth about these things and not be diverted to various theories and hypotheses. It's best to go with the scientific proof from archaeological finds, from studying astronomy from different nations and their documentation of same. The things that Gil has brought forth aren't just pulled out of the air. It's been highly researched and studied, and I think you will find his work fascinating. And he correlates it all to Scripture, and and um, and you see all of it take place before your eyes, and you see things that you had never looked at before. So here it goes on to say, Ezekiel 38 and 39 describe a northern confederacy of nations commanded by a leader called Gog that invades the land of Israel. Now, this confederacy is the same confederacy of Esau and Jacob. It's the two nations warring to this very day. The Yahweh's nation and the Luciferian nation. Nothing is new under the sun. So again, it says Ezekiel 38 and 39 describe a northern confederacy of nations commanded by a leader called Gog that invades the land of Israel. A supernaturally directed natural disaster of colossal scale will occur, not might, will occur. Earthquake, slope failure, mountains overturned, dwellings collapse, rain of hailstones, rain of burning sulfur, and plague. Now, in several areas of the earth, there have been some devastating major disasters, but also the majority of places on the earth have never even come close to experiencing this sort of thing. And for that reason, it's hard to get our heads wrapped around this possibility. But getting our heads wrapped around this possibility is absolutely something that needs to be done. It says this colossal disaster will result in the destruction of the invading armies. So don't let that get past you. This colossal disaster will result in the destruction of the invading armies. Yahweh has a way to direct these events to go against our enemies. In Yahweh's greatness and holiness being seen in the sight of the nations, and in the national conversion of Israel back to her sovereign Elohim, Gog's earthquake occurs after Israel has been dwelling in the land in perceived safety. Upon the northern confederacy, unexpected invasion, whereas Messiah's earthquake that he refers to in Revelation 16. Now know that his perception of what events take place when and how they're named in this article will vary based on your eschatological view of that. Occurs after Israel has been afflicted with judgments at the site where the kings of the earth and of the whole world are gathered for battle. That was in a reference that I made in our live presentation. It doesn't apply to my recorded session. It was specific to the live presentation I did. Okay, so now we are at 17, which he refers to as Messiah's earthquake in the future. And again, these events will vary, and what happens during these events will even vary from Gil Broussard's point of view. So if you want his perspective, you can go to Planet 7X to view his work on the timeline periods. So it says the Apostle John wrote of a great earthquake in the future, associated with the opening of the sixth seal. This earthquake will be the precursor to the greatest earthquake since men have been on the earth. This greatest earthquake will occur in association with the seventh bowl at a place called Armageddon. This future Armageddon earthquake, or what he refers to as Messiah's earthquake, will be associated with the return of Yahushua to Jerusalem. Or some view that particular earthquake being the time that Yahushua comes for his bride and takes his bride into the wilderness. Again, you're going to find some differences. So he references in this article these scriptures, and I'm going to read these scriptures because they're extremely important. But let's finish this paragraph. And is described as inflicting severe topographic and geologic changes on a global scale. Now, we're not talking like one area of the earth. No, we're talking global scale. Scripture appears to look forward to the monumental changes associated with this future earthquake. After Elohim's voice shakes the earth mightily and fully accomplishes these extraordinary geologic changes, his saints will receive a kingdom which cannot be moved. So he references these scriptures, and if you'll just bear with me, I'd like to read them to you. Acts 1:9-11. And having said this, while they were looking on, he was taken up, and a cloud hid him from their sight. And as they were gazing into the heaven as he went up, see, 2 men stood by them dressed in white, who also said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking up into the heaven? This same Yahushua, who was taken up from you into the heaven, shall come in the same way as you saw him go into the heaven. And also, if when we're about to read Zechariah 14, we'll read in 14:4 that in this scripture I just read, it says, note, these men were standing on the Mount of Olives. Excuse me. All right, now for right here, Zechariah 14:1-11. See, a day shall come for Yahweh, and your spoil shall be divided in your midst. Now this is talking to us. This is prophecy talking to us. And I shall gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem, and the city shall be taken, the houses plundered, and the women ravished. Half of the city shall go into exile, but the remnant of the people shall not be cut off from the city. And Yahweh shall go forth, and he shall fight against those nations as he fights in the day of battle. And in that day his feet shall stand upon the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west, a very great valley, and half of the mountain shall move toward the north, and half of it toward the south. And you shall flee to the valley of my mountain, for the valley of the mountains reaches to Atzal. And you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, sovereign of Judah. And Yahweh my Elohim shall come, all the set apart ones with you. And in that day it shall be, there is no light, it is dark. And it shall be one day which is known to Yahweh, neither day nor night. But at evening time there shall be light. Now, ponder that one. At evening time, there shall be light. So something has affected the rotation of the earth at that point. Verse 8, and in that day it shall be that living waters flow from Jerusalem, half of them toward the eastern sea, and half of them toward the western sea, in summer as well as in winter. And Yahweh shall be sovereign over all the earth. In that day there shall be one Yahweh, and his name one. And the land shall be changed into a desert plain from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem. And she shall be raised up and inhabited in her place from Benjamin's gate to the place of the first gate and the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel to the winepresses of the sovereign. And they shall dwell in her, and there shall be no more utter destruction, but Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. Psalm 46, again speaking of this future earthquake. Elohim is our refuge and strength, a help in distress soon found. Therefore we do not fear, though the earth reels and mountains topple into the heart of the seas. Let its waters rage, foam. Let mountains shake with its swelling. Selah. A river whose streams make glad the city of Elohim, the set-apart dwelling of the Most High. Elohim is in her midst. She does not topple. Elohim does help her when morning turns. The nations shall rage, reigns shall topple. He shall give forth his voice. The earth melts. Yahweh of hosts is with us. The Elohim of Jacob is our refuge. Come see the works of Yahweh, the ruins he has wrought on the earth, causing all fighting to cease unto the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariot with fire. Be still and know that I am Elohim. I am exalted among nations. I am exalted in the earth. Yahweh of hosts is with us. The Elohim of Jacob is our refuge. And now here in Haggai 2, 6, 7, 21, 22. For thus said Yahweh of hosts, once more, in a little while, and I am shaking the heavens and earth, the sea and dry land. I shall shake all the nations, and they shall come to the delight of all the nations. And I shall fill this house with esteem, said Yahweh of hosts. Verse 21, verse 22. Speak to Zerubbabel, the governor of Judah, saying, I am shaking the heavens and earth, and I shall overturn the throne of reigns, and I shall destroy the might of the reigns of the nations, and overturn the chariots and their riders, and the horses and their riders shall come down, each by the sword of his brother. And lastly, Hebrews, verse 12. I'm going to read verse 25 through 29. Take heed not to refuse the one speaking. Yahusha. That's who they're speaking of. Take heed not to refuse the one speaking. For if those did not escape who refused the warning on earth, much less we who turn away from him from heaven, whose voice shook the earth then, but now he has promised, saying, Yet once more I shake not only the earth, but also the heaven. And this, yet once more, makes clear the removal of what is shaken, as having been made, so that the unshaken matters might remain. Therefore, receiving an unshakable reign, let us hold the favor through which we serve Elohim pleasingly with reverence and awe, for indeed our Elohim is a consuming fire. That is directly from his word. It doesn't get any more powerful than that. So ahead of us, these things will take place. Conclusion in this write-up. A review, and of course I didn't review all 17, and I'll leave the link that you can review this article in its entirety. A review of the 17 earthquakes listed above shows that virtually the entire story of the Bible can be summarized by its association with earthquakes. Biblical events emphasized by earthquakes are creation, Noah's flood, separation of Abraham and Lot from judgment of the wicked cities, the giving of the law on Mount Sinai, authentication of the leadership of Moses, God's provision in the conquest of Canaan, vindication of the messages of Hebrew prophets, the crucifixion of Yahusha in Jerusalem, the resurrection of Yahusha, the ministry of the apostles and the church, the modern birth pains, sign of the end times, the national conversion of Israel, and the second coming of Yahusha HaMashiach. History, archaeology, and geology appear to confirm independently many earthquakes mentioned in the Bible. So science is actually proving the Bible. Earthquakes have been used distinctively by Elohim to highlight some of the most important events of the Bible. The three main purposes for biblical earthquakes are judgment, deliverance, and communication. The lesson is obvious. Elohim does not do anything really big without emphasizing it with an earthquake. In our fast-paced, man-centered, technology-based society of the 21st century, Elohim would have us pause and consider his sovereign nature and the program he has been accomplishing in the world. And that, my friend, is exactly what I felt that the centurion and the soldiers did at the foot of the crucifixion timber. They paused and they considered, and they came to the conclusion and said, truly, this was the Son of Elohim. Now, in further connecting these like numbers as markers, we again see a common theme. When we had read previously, and this took place 3 times, the lowering of the sheet with the clean and unclean animals, and the vessel was taken back to the heaven. And while Peter was doubting within himself about what the vision might mean, look, the men who had been sent from Cornelius, having asked for the house of Simon, stood at the gate. And how many men came? Well, we read that here. As Peter was thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, see, 3 men seek you. Okay, so we're talking quantity this time. A quantity of 3 times the sheet came down, a quantity of 3 men appear. So the theme of 3 are connected, and that helps Peter understand the vision. It wasn't talking about meaning that we can go out and eat any kind of food we want, because it's not talking about food. It's talking about Jews and unbelievers or Gentiles. And that is what the message of the vision meant. It had nothing to do in this context with the permission to eat unclean foods. There are animals put on earth as scavengers to be, if you will, the garbage collectors, so that the earth will and waters will not be polluted. They're very valued, but they're not to be eaten, not to deprive anyone, but to keep their health, such as catfish or bottom eaters. They're unclean because you should only eat fish with fins and scales. Lobster, though they may taste delicious, and I've eaten them before I knew better, they're scavengers. So you are what you eat, and if you eat things that eat garbage, then that's going to hurt our bodies. And those his commandments are for our health and safety. Not to go on that rabbit trail there, but I want to make it clear that these scriptures are not justifying people to eat anything. You can. He's given us free will, but you reap what you sow. So the three connected to the sheet lowering and also to the three men. The other thing that was brought out in our live session was that, again, it connected us back to the time of Yahushua's crucifixion, was when Peter denied Yahushua 3 times. Again, that's a quantity. And again, from this story, we know Peter was there at the time of crucifixion. We know the number 3 times, him denying him 3 times, is connected. So again, this chapter in Acts is connecting us strongly, extremely strongly, to the Passion Week and the crucifixion. So let's start in 19. And as Peter was thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, "See, 3 men seek you, but rise up, go down, and go with them, not doubting at all, for I have sent them." So Peter went down to the men who had been sent to him from Cornelius and said, "Look, I am the one you seek. Why have you come?" And they said, "Cornelius, the captain or centurion, a righteous man, and one who fears Elohim, and well spoken of by the entire nation of the Jews, of the Yehudim, was instructed by a set-apart messenger." They had no problem sharing this with Peter, because that's how truthful and genuine Cornelius was. They gave him the message. They knew Cornelius. They knew Cornelius wouldn't lie to them. They had no problem relaying this message to Peter. "Instructed by a set-apart messenger to send for you to his house and to hear words from you." So inviting them in, he housed them. And on the next day, Peter went away with them, and some brothers from Joppa went with him. So Peter took a couple of brothers with him. And the following day, they entered into Caesarea. And Cornelius was waiting for them, having called together his relatives and close friends. Cornelius was so moved. He was believing that Peter would come. He was already sharing with his relatives and close friends. He had faith. And it came to be that when Peter entered, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and bowed before him. But Peter raised him up, saying, "Stand up. I myself am also a man." And talking with him, he went in and found many who had come together. So Peter saw that he was expected, and he's greeted by many looking forward to his presence, and most importantly, Yahweh's presence. And he said to them, "You know that a Judahite or Jewish man is not allowed to associate with or go to one of another race. But Elohim has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. So the Jews had been taught not to intermarry. They had been taught not to take up the man-made traditional customs of the heathens, because once you are a believer in Yahushua HaMashiach, you put down the man-made traditions of the various cultures wherever you live, and you take up his feast days, better referred to as his rehearsals, because we are his bride, and his bride attend his rehearsals, and they occur annually. We read about them in Leviticus 23 and also in Exodus 23. That is why I came without hesitation when I sent for. So I asked, why have you sent for me? Let me read that again. And he said to them, you know that a Jewish man is not allowed to associate with or go to one of another race. But Elohim has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. So that clearly shows that we are talking about mankind and not foods. That is why I came without hesitation when I was sent for. So I asked, why have you sent for me? So of course, he's about to find out. And Cornelius said, 4 days ago I was fasting unto this hour, and at the 9th hour I prayed in my house, and see, a man stood before me in shining garments, and said, Cornelius, your prayer has been heard, and your kind deeds were remembered before Elohim. Now send to Joppa, and call Simon here, who is also called Peter. He is staying in the house of Simon, a leather tanner by the sea. When he comes, he shall speak to you. So even the messenger told Cornelius he will come. And he did. So I sent to you immediately, and you have done well to come. And now we are all present before Elohim to hear all that you have been commanded by Elohim. And opening his mouth, Peter said, truly, I see that Elohim shows no partiality. Again, Galatians 3:28. There is not Jew nor Greek, there is not slave nor free, there is not male and female, for you are all one in Yahushua HaMashiach. That is pivotal, because Yahushua HaMashiach is our Kohen HaGadol, our high priest of what priestly order? If you followed my Bible studies, you would know he's of the Melchizedek order. He is our high priest of the Melchizedek order. And when we believe in Yahushua HaMashiach, we become priests of the Melchizedek order. And there is no distinguishing between Jews or Greek, slave or free, male or female, for we are all one in Messiah Yahushua. Now again, that could have never been accomplished under the Levitical priesthood, because you had to have proof of your mother and father lineage. Whereas in when Melchizedek was first introduced in Genesis 14, it states he was without mother and father. What that's really saying is that he did not have to have the mother and father lineage connection to the Levitical priesthood, because that was the only way a Levite could become a priest. We can become priests in the Melchizedek order without mother-father lineage connecting to the Levites. Under the Levitical priesthood, this wouldn't happen. Galatians 3:28 would not be recognized. But under the Melchizedek priesthood, we can be recognized from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. It says, for you are all one in Messiah. We are one, and we are one in him, and we all practice his same Moedim, his same rehearsals. So if we travel anywhere around the world and we run into brothers and sisters of the Melchizedek priesthood under the new covenant message of Yahushua HaMashiach that connects us back to Exodus 19:5, our original covenant, marriage ketuvah, and then that also connects us all the way back to the promise of Abraham. We are one. We follow his word. We follow his rehearsals. There's no discrepancy. That's how it should be. So anywhere we travel, when we meet our brothers and sisters, we should be on the same page because we are in the same word, his word. So now it says, in opening his mouth, Peter said, truly, I see that Elohim shows no partiality. So that's right. Up here it said, I should not call any man common or unclean. But Elohim has shown me that. So he's obedient to Elohim. And we'll notice that Peter presents the covenant gospel message tailored to those gathered. It's very different from Stephen's presentation, because Stephen stood in front of the Sanhedrin and he takes them all the way back to the Abrahamic promise that Yahweh made to Abraham to make him a great nation. And he tracked with them all the way through the Torah, through the prophet and the writings, all the way to the time of Yahushua and to his crucifixion. That's what Stephen did. Peter is giving the covenant gospel message to his audience, and he takes a little different approach, but he still connects it. So let's read on and see how he does it. Truly I see that Elohim shows no partiality, but in every nation he who fears him and works righteously is accepted by him. He sent the word to the children of Israel, bringing the good news, peace, through Yahushua HaMashiach. He is master of all. And he goes on to say, you know what word came to be throughout all Judah, beginning from Galilee after the immersion which John proclaimed, how Elohim did anoint Yahushua HaMashiach of Nazareth with the set-apart spirit and with power, who went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil, for Elohim was with him. And of course, this all took place in their generation. So they very well may just be recounting in their minds what they already knew or had seen or had been told. And Peter goes on, and we are witnesses of all he did, both in the country of the Jews and in Jerusalem, whom they killed by hanging on a timber. So yeah, Peter was there. He recalled he denied him 3 times, but he turned around and he became very powerful and truly gave his life completely over. No matter what happened to Peter, he was bold and ultimately did give his life for Yahushua and didn't even find it worthy to be crucified right side up. He said, crucify me upside down, because he didn't feel worthy to be crucified in the like manner of Yahushua. So Peter also is vividly connected and witnesses this to Cornelius. And he goes on to say, Elohim raised up this one, Yahusha, on the third day and let him be seen. And we discussed the third day last session. But think about this. Do you think Cornelius was aware of that event? It was, as I started this study, we were in 39 AD. Yahusha, according to that timeline, would have been crucified, died, and buried, and resurrected in AD 30. So we're only talking 9 years later. And this is the greatest event on planet Earth. Do you think Cornelius was aware of that event? Do you think the elite role of being a centurion, do we not think that the centurion spoke of this incident forever? Do we think that possibly that Cornelius could have been in the background somewhere, or even one of the soldiers? Maybe he wasn't a centurion at that time. Maybe he was a subordinate. Maybe he was there. Maybe that was the reason why he so passionately prayed and offered alms and did charitable deeds and taught his family and ministered to his servants as well as the soldiers beneath him. Maybe that's why he was bold in his witness of Yahweh. Was surely there's a great connection here. And surely he knew about this event. Do you think Cornelius knew about the rolled stone? Well, I do. Who was guarding the tomb? Again, it was the soldiers. It was the soldiers. If that big, huge, heavy stone was rolled away, the soldiers would be communicating about that, because that was significant. That was what they were to guard. And more than likely the earth quaked and the stone rolled, which may have offered them grace not to be put to death. But these events, something to this magnitude, is not taken lightly. And they may not have had news as we have it today, or emails or cell phones to communicate, but they had ways to communicate of major events. And he was of the Roman army. He was a centurion. He was a soldier. And the centurions and the soldiers were deeply integrated into the crucifixion story of Yahushua HaMashiach. And they were greatly impacted to the point of them declaring at the foot of the crucifixion tree, truly, this was the Son of Elohim. To recognize that was powerful. So Elohim raised up this one on the third day and let him be seen, not to all the people, but to witnesses, those having been chosen before by Elohim, to us who ate and drank with him after he arose from the dead. So he appeared to them after he arose, and they ate and drank with him. And he commanded us to proclaim to the people and to witness that it is he who was appointed by Elohim to be judge of the living and the dead. Excuse me. So it says, and he commanded us to proclaim to the people. Now he's talking to a centurion. So how do you think Cornelius viewed the word commanded? I mean, with a soldier, with a centurion, if it was a command, it was done. And so he probably honed in on that word, commanded us to proclaim. And whether Cornelius was ever commanded or not, he proclaimed. He proclaimed because it was truth. He proclaimed because he had a life-changing event, which I pray all of you have. I've had it, and I pray you have it one day when you completely surrender to the living Elohim, the living Messiah, seated at the right hand of Elohim, our Cohen Hagadol, our high priest of the Melchizedek order, who was and is to come, and is the only way, because no one can come to the Father except through him, because he paid the price. He paid our debt in full. He did a new blood ratified covenant that if you accept his proposal, then he will receive you as his if you come to him with a sincere heart. And then after you accept what he did for you on the tree, dying in your place, and believing he died, was buried, and rose again the third day, and you diligently seek him and live your life for him from that point forward, knowing that it is no longer you that live, but Christ, Yahushua, that lives in you, then he will lead and guide and direct you. And then you can break bread and have wine as the covenant confirming meal, being a Melchizedek priest of every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. We are one. We are one. No longer Jew nor Greek, male or female, slave or free. We are one in Yahushua HaMashiach. Of what priesthood? The Melchizedek priesthood. Revelation 5, 9, and 10. Go and read those scriptures for yourself. So it goes on to say, to this one all the prophets bear witness, that through his name everyone believing in him does receive forgiveness of sins. Do you think Cornelius ever heard word of what was proclaimed by the soldiers at the foot of the crucifixion timber? Do you think he ever heard that they declared truly this was the Son of Elohim? Do you think he pondered that? I do believe he had heard what the centurion and the soldiers had said, the conclusions that they had come to after having to carry out their gruesome orders. It had to be heart-wrenching. It was definitely life-changing. While Peter was still speaking these words, the set-apart Spirit fell upon all those hearing the word, and those of the circumcision who believed were astonished, as many as came with Peter, because the gift of the set-apart Spirit had been poured out on the Gentiles also, for they were hearing them speaking with tongues and extolling Elohim. Then Peter answered, is anyone able to forbid water, that these should not be immersed who have received the set-apart Spirit, even as also we? And he commanded them to be immersed in the name of Yahushua HaMashiach. Then they asked him to remain a few days. So it was a powerful event. Acts chapter 10 is absolutely powerful because the gospel message has now gone from Jerusalem to Judea to the uttermost ends of the earth. And so they are carrying out the Great Commission, and through the Ruach HaKodesh working in them and through them. And we know from 1 Corinthians 14:22, tongues then are a sign, not for believers, but for unbelievers. Prophecy, however, just reading his word, is for believers, not for unbelievers, just understanding prophecy. But the tongues, those tongues really helped the unbelievers believe in these circumstances, and the Ruach HaKodesh was working powerfully among both Jews and Gentiles, and the miracles were obvious, and the faith was growing through the presentation of the gospel message. So that draws to an end this study of Acts chapter 10, and I hope you found it as exciting as I did. And I pray I didn't make any errors in my presentation. Please forgive me if I did, and always just go back to Scripture. Like I said, sometimes I'll say one thing and mean another. I do apologize for that. Sometimes editing can be kind of tricky, so just bear with me in that. And always, I want you to go to Scripture. I give you some insights to ponder, but ultimately, go by His Word and go by what Yahweh directs you through the Ruach HaKodesh. And next week, I'm going to try to cover Acts chapter 11 and 12. Acts chapter 11 is like a report back in Jerusalem by Peter of what was accomplished in Caesarea. So it's kind of going to be a little bit of a recap of what we talked about today. And then we're going to move on to seeing where James, the brother of John, is killed by Herod. And then when Peter is jailed and is rescued by the messenger angel. And we're also going to see Herod is eaten by worms and ultimately dies. So that's going to be what we'll look at next week. And I thank you for joining me. I apologize for running a little long, and I pray you are blessed and your family members are blessed. And I look forward to you joining me again. And until then, I'll keep you in my prayers as we walk through the scriptures written in the book of Acts, and we glean wisdom from His Word and His instructions. So be blessed. See you then, and thanks again for joining. Bye-bye.